Good morning and welcome to Thought for the Day for Thursday, July the 29th. The passage I have chosen today from Ezekiel 34, I have chosen partly because I wanted to get to know Ezekiel better, but mainly because I was intrigued by the significance of the passage right through into the New Testament. It has been said that the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. This passage is a good example of this. Like so much of the Old Testament, the passage speaks not only of the times that Ezekiel lived in, but remains totally relevant today, with a universal and eternal significance. It tells of God's love and overriding plan for his people, and so looks forward to the new covenant and the coming of Jesus. Ezekiel 34, verses 1 to 16, the shepherd and his flock. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered all over the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered, and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds, and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock, so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. For this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and in all the settlements in the land. I will tend them with good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. Ezekiel was one of the great Old Testament prophets. He served as a priest in the temple in Jerusalem, but was captured and taken to Babylon, where he experienced his first vision. He lived the rest of his life in exile, prophesying about 600 years before Jesus was born. The passage divides into two parts. In the first 10 verses, Ezekiel refers to the shepherds of Israel. In the ancient Near East, kings and princes were often referred to as shepherds. Indeed, David rose to be king from being a shepherd. But here, the shepherds are not only the kings and overseers of Israel, but also the priests and the prophets, so both the civil and the spiritual leaders. Ezekiel is referring to those who are more concerned with feeding themselves than their flocks, who exploited and fleeced their flock for personal gain, rather than feeding them and nurturing them with love. They used force and cruelty instead of care, wisdom, and compassion. As a result, God's flock was scattered, a reference to the time of exile, and they became food for wild animals. Here, hostile foreign nations. The faithless shepherds didn't even care. God's reaction is to promise to hold those unfaithful shepherds to account. God noticed when his flock was neglected and in danger, and vowed to deal with those ungodly shepherds by stopping their abuse and rescuing his flock from them. The last part of the passage describes how this corrupt human shepherding would be replaced by the perfect and loving shepherding of God. In a glorious reversal of the flock's fortunes, these verses contain a beautiful lyrical account of how God would gather his flock together and bring them to rich pastures. He would search for the lost, rescue the strays, bind up the injured, and strengthen the weak. He would shepherd his flock with justice and punish those who had grown fat at the expense of others. In verses 14 and 15, we can't help but notice the similarities with the beginning of Psalm 23, written 400 years earlier. The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. What a promise. But this passage doesn't just look back to Psalms. God's loving shepherding came to its ultimate fruition in the person of Jesus, the perfect shepherd for God's scattered sheep. Jesus must surely have based the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15 on this passage. In this case, using the metaphor of finding the lost sheep to emphasize the joy in heaven over one sinner's repentance. And he must also have had this passage in mind in John 10. In one of the critically important I am passages in John, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He is declaring that he is the true and righteous shepherd of whom Ezekiel spoke, the Messiah. Here, Jesus takes the title to himself, not just for Israel, as God did in Ezekiel, but for all believers under his protection all over the world. And Jesus goes further. All faithful shepherds care for their flock and risk danger in doing so, but Jesus explicitly said he would lay down his life for his flock. We know that that is exactly what happened on the cross, so that we might be freed from the slavery of sin and enjoy an eternal relationship with God our Father. So despite the abuses, failures, or negligence of so many of the shepherds in authority over us today, whether in the civil or even the spiritual arena, we can rest assured that we have the ultimate good shepherd to care for us whatever life brings. We also have a model of servant leadership and how Christian faith should look like in practice that we can all aspire to. May Jesus safely shepherd you today.